Welcome back to another episode of African Farmer Voices. It's been a while since I last did a video here and actually shared some of my reflections and observations. Lucky enough, I'm back. And as much as I'm back, it's not only for today, but I'm building on this momentum and getting us to the next level of what we hope for, what we would aspire for, and what I envision for the continent of Africa when we look at the pharmaceutical industry, where it is, where we envision it to be, but also the milestone that we have to go through towards getting to that vision. So today I'm going to talk about regulatory sciences, regulatory affairs, and regulatory developments. And the essence of it is that as a continent, most of our work has been around regulatory system strengthening. I think from 2005, when we started the conceptualization of the pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa, then ultimately, as a follow-up to that, one of the key things and the key caveats that were happening is from a policy and regulatory framework, there were some gaps and inconsistencies that needed to be addressed. And if those are going to be addressed, then we needed to work towards streamlining the regulatory landscape, then moving from a streamlined regulatory landscape, then to move to the next level of where we're saying, now we can build our local industries, now we can invest in research and development and all different aspects. But also the essence of it is that we needed to ensure that we're complying with best practices of practice in industry, but also in terms of a regulatory safeguard to safeguard the benefits and the actually welfare of the public, who is me and you within the continent, who are buying products, using products for our healthcare needs, as diverse as they might be. So that is where the journey started for us. On the back group of that, then we've had the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization that has done a lot of work in terms of regulatory system strengthening. You can acknowledge we have different regional economic communities, centers of excellence in regulatory science and regulatory functions across the continent. And this has been a journey that has been ongoing. Most of it started from 2009 from now, core regulatory system strengthening work. And the journey has moved forward. Post COVID-19, 2019, 2020, the momentum was picking up, and actually we were moving towards operationalization of the African Medicines Agency. That is almost happening. And as it's almost happening, we've also moved in to see what are the key lessons and learnings that we've captured from the regional economic communities in terms of their experiences in the medicines regulatory harmonization frameworks. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities for improvement? But also, what is our envisioned future? And I think that is where most of the work is happening at the moment. On another note, when we move at it from the aspect that we ratified the African Medicines Agency Treaty, that ratification came with actual developments in the next frontier. And those developments were, now there's a plan, the ongoing recruitment towards having a DG that is substantive to lead the secretariat towards operationalizing the agency. That is underway, and there are so many other activities that are happening. But how was this agency going to work? That was a question that people kept asking, and actually almost everybody wanted to know how that would work. And therefore, to generate evidence on how that would work, the pilot started, and the pilot was letting applicants, and that is the marketing authorization holder, manufacturers and researchers who were developing new products, submit the application that were meeting a particular set of eligibility criteria. And therefore then these products were going to be submitted, reviewed, evaluated, and actually recommended for registration depending on whether they satisfied the committee of technical experts who are reviewing these dossiers and registering these new medicines. That happened. And lucky enough, in February this year, we are coming to the end of the month of February, early March, there was a list that was published, and the list had 5 products that had been approved. We have some therapies, anti-cancers, and a couple of other products, but we also had a vaccine that were approved and are recommended as the listed products in the Green Book African Medicines Agency. Fantastic achievement and fantastic contribution in the sense that from a continental level, there is capacity to review, to assess, and actually come up with the recommendations guided by scientific principle and basis to bring new products into the continent. That is already a win. But there is a caveat to this development, and the caveat is we need to ask ourselves all these regulatory system strengthening work that we are working on, and also all the work that we are doing to ensure that we bring new therapies and new solutions. Why are we doing it? In the core of our work that we do as African Pharmaceutical Network and all the engagements we do with our stakeholders is about ensuring that safe, effective, and quality medicines get to the market and they get to the people who need them. In making that happen, we acknowledge that 1, we have to guarantee that research and development will happen and the medicines will be made available. And 2, we need to create an enabling ecosystem that will enable the players who are actually developing these therapies to have the commercial incentive, the business fundamentals of bringing that product has to make sense. So if the business side of things now have to make sense, the question is, if we recommend them from a continental level, what will make a medicine get into the continent? And that is now where I bring you to Regulatory Affairs 101. For every single medicine that you will buy in any pharmacy or you get in any hospital, it has to have been registered by the national regulatory authority in the country within which you're operating. Registration is a process of you making a submission, the person who manufactured the medicine, submitting the documents, being evaluated by the regulatory officers, confirming that it's actually the data is satisfactory, and therefore then they register the medicine. Once registered, the license is issued, and that is the time at which it can be brought into the country. The caveat we have to acknowledge is the recommendation at the continental level is not equivalent to registration at the national level. Therefore, then, that needs to be translated into registration in each of the countries where there is a need for these medicines. At the moment, that process has not been streamlined, and it is a learning that we need to pick from the regional economic communities where that became a problem, because we were having recommendations from the Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Committees, the joint assessment procedures and all. But after the joint assessment procedure, we have a favorable recommendation: the product should be registered. If I'm going to wait for more than 6 months, 9 months, or even a year, or even more than that, to get the recommendation recognized and be registered in the sense of being a new license in that country of operation, then the beneficial value is lost, because that is a year after the initial process, and probably the initial process of the joint assessment took more than 12 months, 18 months or so. It's going to be a pain point, because then at a national level, almost every regulatory authority is saying national procedure should be taking 24 months. So 24 months, if I'm talking about 18 plus another 12 or so, then it's already more than 24 months. So that becomes a pain point. And that mechanism of translating these listing and these recommendations into national registration procedures need to be addressed and need to be considered. And if it was my recommendation to the Director General Africa Medicines Agency and even the current Secretariat for the Africa Medicines Regulatory Harmonization, we need to ask ourselves, what do we need to do with the national regulatory authorities to set up mechanisms? And the mechanism should be that once a product has been recommended for registration and the scientific information is reviewed and actually an assessment report is developed, that assessment report should establish the basis for registration at the country level, and that should be expedited, because that is the point at which the manufacturer can make a decision to supply the product into the country. That is going to be important. The translation of a recommendation or a listing to a national registration, because the products are consumed and are used by patients within countries within the continent, going to be a critical piece. And that is a caveat and an area that we need to look into. Then the second thing that we need to look at from a continental perspective is in ensuring there's reliable access to safe, effective, and quality medicine. Access is not only being able to be supplied in the market, but supply is linked to procurement and the financing mechanisms. From a continental perspective, we need to ask ourselves, what are the financing mechanisms that we are having, especially after most of the development funding is at risk, with the USA pulling back on the decision from the US perspective. So the financing is becoming a challenge. What are the continental procurement mechanisms, and how do we work towards that? Discussions have been ongoing on pooled procurement mechanisms, and in this pooled procurement is about having concessions, and with those concessions in place and we aggregating volumes, we are able to negotiate and get favorable prices. Favorable prices can only happen when the volumes are there. I would give an example at the moment in terms of the listing that is there. I'm seeing some of the anti-cancer products and even some of the vaccine, the immunization that we're looking at for cervical cancer, Gardasil. And in that case, then we realize this is a product when we're talking about cervical cancer prevention. It's a continental issue that we have to address at a continent level. How can we invoke the Africa CDC to establish a pool procurement mechanism in collaboration with the Africa Medicines Agency, and all the different countries contribute to that mechanism, that kitty? And in contribution, then we can make concessions and commitments to the producers and suppliers of these medicines to make them available in the countries in the volumes that we desire. It would be cheaper. We will be guaranteed that from a continental listing, the registration is now making sense for the business, but also in access to the patients who need it. then ultimately now distill it to the fundamentals at the basic level where we are committing to negotiate for favorable prices because of the economies of scale in volumes, but also a single registration mechanism. That will move us to the next level, and ultimately governments moving towards ensuring the financing is designed and is robust enough that is going to deliver on these imperatives and these needs. Ultimately, then, the next thing that we need to ask ourselves, if we get to the point of procurement at a continental level, what are the trade mechanisms that are going to be in place? Because if I'm buying it at a continental level, the corresponding document should be approved from a continental perspective. And in the countries, as much as I'll be moving from Kenya to Uganda to Rwanda, whatever it is, the import permits and the import documentation should be harmonized, such that we say if a product is bought through this procurement mechanism at a continental level, it's going to be permitted to be shipped from country to country depending on needs and on the quantities that are already documented and verified for that shipment. That is what will get us to get the products to the people who need them. That is when the regulatory harmonization and regulatory system strengthening mechanisms that we are working towards will make an impact and actually will make an inflection on the quality of life of the patient that we are dealing, make a business sense to drive growth of the pharmaceutical industry, but also deliver in our health product security and healthcare security in the continent, which is our vision and is our aspiration as envisioned and actually defined within the new public health order as per the Africa CDC agenda. When we look at this, there is an opportunity, there's work to be done, but I believe if we work together and we walk that journey together, we'll deliver for our people and we'll deliver for the continent. If you enjoy the conversation, I would recommend please subscribe to the channel, share this video with other people who are keen on learning about the developments within the continent, especially around regulatory system strengthening, but also building the pharmaceutical industry in the continent. Share your comments and feedback with me. Let me think through them. Let me share my perspective in the next video that I'll be doing next weekend. Let's build the continent together. Thank you and have a good one.